Hello, everyone. We hope you're having a fantastic day and a great time at WriteHive 2024, where we're writing the future we need for our fifth consecutive year. I'm Jesse Pullman. I'm a moderator for WriteHive, and I have the distinct privilege to interview one of our guests of honor this year, RM Virtues. If you see me looking down and away from the camera, it's probably me scribbling notes to possibly elaborate on later. You may also see my cat hop on my desk and possibly need to be relocated if she gets, well, catty with me. Last note, if you're in Discord chat, feel free to leave any questions and RM will do his best to answer them. With that out of the way, I'm super excited to jump into this interview with RM Virtues. First of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your personal story, and what you're working on? In other words, who is our guest of honor, RM Virtues? Are you doing any other events for WriteHive 2024 that our attendees can check you out in? And lastly, do you also have any pets that might guest star in this interview?
So lastly, unfortunately, I will not have any pets guest starring in the interview. You may hear my dog if the siren passes. He's in the kitchen, but he can't be trusted around other voices. But other than that, which is the most important part, of course, I am an Afro-Indigenous two-spirit author of romantasy, a horror romance, and just mainly all the subgenres of romance I've probably dipped my hand into or will. Um, as for what I'm doing right now, I am actually working on a lot of religious horror romance esque. I'm working on the standalone sequel to Sing Me to Sleep, which was my big sleep paralysis demon horror romance of 2021. And I'm also working on another standalone sequel in the same series that will come out a bit later this year. And as for Right Hive, I will also be doing a panel, or I just recorded the panel for a paranormal romance live event, and then also decolonizing fiction will be my second uh, interview or panel.
Everything about that was awesome except for the sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis is terrifying.
I mean, it definitely is, which is why I kind of wrote the book because I was like, well, what if my sleep paralysis was less terrifying, and the demon that was assigned to me actually liked me. So that was a big sort of working out the trauma from that, but it was actually really fun, and it's become an entire world that's been bridged into another world, and I'll probably be talking about that world a lot because it is like the universe that I've been building since I was a kid and has directly fed into my ideas of religious horror, religion in general, and then my own religious beliefs. So it's really fun. It's been a labor of love for a long time in my life.
Awesome. So let's get into that theme stuff a little bit. One of my favorite bits of literature is themes and how they play into the narrative. So how did you get started on the religious horror and divine revenge thematic angles? Was it a personal experience of some kind, just a literary fancy, or was it something else?
It really wasn't. I mean, it's funny to say it really wasn't a literary. It's not like literature didn't really lead me down that path the way that it might have if I'd been reading like Paradise Lost or Dante's Inferno. Like those were not books that I was exposed to. When I was younger, I didn't read them until much later, post high school, etc. So it really was mostly my uh, personal experiences. I was raised Mexican Catholic in a border town in New Mexico. Um, and obviously, the church has its issues, and being a queer person in the church has always had an excessive amount of issues. So pretty young, I was questioning a lot of things, trying to figure out how I felt about certain things, and all trying to deal with the Catholic guilt that they give you as a baptism prize. So it was a lot of self exploration and a lot of questioning myself and everybody around me. Um, and it basically became 11, 12 years old. I was reading a lot about the seven deadly sins. And I soon got very enthralled with them. They were probably my first major special interest. So I was reading a lot about them and writing a lot about them, and now they're main characters in my upcoming series. But I've dragged my feet on it because it is such a personal project, and it's been my life's work really. So um, that really was just my journey with them and these characters, and then later on with Greek mythology, other types of mythology, my own our indigenous mythology. My grandpa used to tell us a lot of stories, and my grandma, like they would tell us a lot of stories about, the folklore and stuff that would come from what's now known as Mexico. And in New Mexico, we also have our own folklore developed because of the migration. My grandpa was Apache, and he would constantly tell us about different viewpoints of the world. He wasn't as church going as my grandma, and he was always willing to kind of get me out of it if he could. But he would tell me a lot of stories too that kind of uh, molded that or carved that path out for me. So by the time I was, old enough to kind of understand all of this myself and write about it, the divine revenge really seemed like it had to be. It was inevitable because a lot of it felt like, it was a lot of religious trauma, a lot of anger about how things were done, how people were treated because of how things were done, how my own ancestors were treated. The reason that live where we live and do what we do, the reason that we're Catholic to begin with was colonialism. So there's a lot of in decolonization and moving away from those systems. You have to question your upbringing, the church, and all of that. So it kind of just felt inevitable to start writing about that and put that in my stories, and to do it, whether with gods as mortals or gods in their godly form or humans standing against gods. It all seemed to have the same kind of pull to me because it served the same purpose, in that we're questioning fate and what it means to actually believe in something. So I've just been constantly playing with that, and revenge seemed like a good way to do it most of the time.
Speaking about revenge and the very personal nature that revenge tends to have for people, because you got to have that certain drive to really get at it. How do you keep your readers feeling engaged with your work on a personal level when it's dealing with these powerful cosmic entities like gods or demons or what have you that transcend normal human experiences? How do you hook your readers in? How do you keep them going along?
I mean, I think for Sing Me to Sleep specifically, I kind of had it in already because monster romance is still a really big thing, but it seemed like it was gathering steam at the time that I wrote that book. So I kind of had that in already. That was already a niche that needed to be filled. Beyond that, though, I think it was really important that the characters, despite being demons or gods or whatever else, that they still felt human to some extent. They still have the same motivations that we as humans might have, or the same outlook on life. With Sing Me to Sleep and the demons in Sing Me to Sleep, they're very big on free will and not putting all of our, beliefs in one place, or allowing other people to have their own beliefs. Um, they are the good guys in my series because it's more a representation of what they were given by white supremacist systems, the representation that they were given and what they came to, signal to other people, and how that, how those values weren't demonized, to say the least, before colonization or in indigenous circles or communities. Um, we always find use for everything. We know the importance of balance, and that's what I'm always trying to drive home, is just that importance of balance and finding order in the universe. So, in order to do that and still keep readers wanting to know more, you do have to make them. They can't be infallible. They can't be all seeing, all knowing, despite there has to be limitations to the all seeing, all knowing. I feel like I've definitely made limitations to that. Um, and it does help to just to have like now natural boundaries. Like if if you're having a story take place in the United States, obviously states, people in these states are living very different lives, so it kind of feels like that is like you're treating it like these very individual pockets of actions, morals, understandings of the world, drives, motivations, etc. um, you kind of use that to your advantage, and that really puts less pressure on the writer to figure out how to humanize these characters if it's taking place around humans with humans. Like Sing Me to Sleep, the female MC, she was a human, she was immortal. So she kind of saw and was introduced to the world in line with us. As for Gods of Hunger, which is my Greek myth series, the gods are mortal. So they're fighting a lot of mortal issues, and they have a lot of mortal limitations to the power that they wield, and trying to make that power go further than it does, and being unable to do that. And I think that um, really helped me. Obviously, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to make your gods mortals to make them relatable. They just really have to have those characteristics. And that's kind of easy because when you think about like Greek gods, for instance, a lot of them just stand for mortal emotions, mortal motivations. War is a very human uh, occurrence in our history. Love, it's a very human emotion. So they're really, I mean, for us coming from an indigenous background, um, we do see a lot of our deities or spirits as their extensions of the world and extensions of us, and they're more, they're less so supposed to be humanoid or separate from the land or separate from the people. Like they're very much integrated into our lives, the wind, the water, these very natural occurrences. That's what we usually look to. So to make them feel like that as just a part of the world is also important. But definitely just making sure they're kind of grounded in a way where a human can connect to them and feel like, okay, I see myself in this person. Obviously, I'm not a god, I'm not a demon, or a non-human creature of any kind, but I still relate because they still have the same motivations, they still have the same drive, they still have the same goals, or worries, fears, etc. So it really is about humanizing these creatures that are not meant to be human, or these deities that are supposed to be beyond human understanding.
Yeah, I love the contrast between demonizing and humanizing, especially through the nature of systems of morality and the way that all of that plays into each other, because that is humanity at its core. It's human connection. So speaking of connection, for writers who are looking at this genre of work, at this whole romantasy, at this divine revenge thematic structure, they're looking to experiment with these themes. What are some things they should keep in mind? What are some positives, maybe some pointers that they can draw away from it? And what are some not so much negatives, but more like cautions or warnings, like, hey, this might sound like a good idea, but um, just like demons sound like they might be bad and they could turn out to be good, this idea might sound good, but could maybe turn out to have, if not a really bad outcome, then at least things to be aware of and to be cautious of going into it.
I think obviously it's a very wide area. There's a lot that can be done within it, in I mean, experimenting with religion and fantasy, and other types of work. Um, it can also become very easily a trap that you set for yourself when trying to build those systems, because we have to remember that even though we as writers feel like we are like inventing something, we're probably not inventing something. Odds are you took it from something that you saw, something that you knew, something that you saw in your peripheral, like that you didn't look at maybe fully or understand fully. It just stuck in your mind, this very small detail, excuse me, detail. Um, So you have to go back and look and research and be sure that you're doing your research on the aspects that you're putting in your story. Uh, for my series, uh, which is a series of sacrilegious events, and that's the seven deadly sins. For that, I did have to go in and look at what exactly I wanted to do with the story, what was the message that I wanted to convey, um, and who's it for? Like, who is the book for? Who's the audience going to be? Who are the people that you expect to get it, or want to get it? Obviously, there are going to be readers who pick up your work and don't really know what they're getting into, and that's okay. Um, but your readers, the actual audience that you expect, and even if it's you, even if it's yourself, you're writing for you, which is great. You have to really ask yourself, what am I trying to say? What is the message I want to convey? And if it is just for fun, that's good, but that still requires some self awareness and research. Uh, as far as like things not to kind of step into too quickly, last year I did talk on a panel about horror, I mean religion in horror and fiction in general. And one of the things that came up was just in building a religion, you really have to think about why you're building it. What does the belief system look like? Does it mirror a real world belief system? Are you pulling from multiple belief systems? Because even then, you have to be respectful. I mean, a lot of religions, they're real. These are real religions with real people who follow them. Um, even I, who, yes, I have personal beef with my own religious upbringing, I still understand that not everybody has that upbringing. So even that, if you are critiquing a religion, that's absolutely okay, but you have to, critique the religion in a way that allows for other parties who may be part of that religion, or may have left that religion. Like, you have to still be respectful, um but you can absolutely talk about, the critique should never be buried by a desire to be, um I don't know the best way to put it, but like the critique you should definitely not limit yourself in your critique because of what you think um other people will say, but you should definitely still be respectful. And that's the same as pulling from other religions or using those as references for your own. Um, I, kind of guided people through questions last year of like, what would be the first questions you want to ask? Is it, monotheistic? Is it polytheistic? What is the setting like? How does the setting play into the gods that they worship? Because obviously, if you live in a desert, you've never seen water, the likelihood of, I mean, you've never seen like bodies of water, the likelihood of having like a sea god might be less necessary than a coastal town that where their whole thing is fishing. Um, so you really have to see what the world looks like for people before you can build a religion around those people or for those people. So that's really important. Shortfalls, same thing, really, just like being respectful, doing your research, making sure that you understand what you're doing with certain details, and you understand what those details will, um, what they translate to in the real world for real readers. I mean, I think that's something that goes unspoken about a lot, or at least it happens a lot, where you don't mean to do harm, but you do harm because you didn't really understand how these concepts play together, or play against each other, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important to kind of have to go piece by piece in building, your world in general, but especially religion, just because again, it is such uh the topic is what it is for so many people. And so you don't want to really, step over the boundary of critiquing it in a way where you're just like anti-theistic, or, like you don't want to come across as be, like, I know the word I'm looking for and I can't think of offensive, but offensive. You don't want to be offensive. Um, but additionally to that is just having that reason and like from the start, having the reason for having that religion in the first place, because obviously you can have worlds without religions, but they're probably still going to have beliefs. They're still probably going to have faith in something, whether it's another person, whether it's just nature in general, et cetera, et cetera. um you really have to think about what that means for the characters and how it plays. Don't put it in there for nothing, because then odds are much higher that it's going to come across in a way that you don't mean for it to. Um, I would also swear by, having other like sensitivity readers, somebody else with eyes on it to make sure that you're saying what you think you're saying. And that's really for anything. A lot of this information or these tips can go to pretty much anything. And I think I say it on every panel I'm on, but it really is just research, research, research. Like, you have to be able to, if somebody asks you what this means, you should be able to convey what that means. But you also have to remember, once your book's out there and readers have it, the information is kind of out of your hands. So you have to do all the work beforehand, and make sure that you're saying what you mean to say.
There was a lot there that was really awesome. I think you jumped into my next question a little bit, which is fine because I'm gonna go a little off script and I'm gonna call back to when you were talking about Milton's Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno, and I'm gonna tie that back into the points you were talking about the critique versus the offensiveness. And it's just interesting to me because those books, like especially I happen to really like Paradise Lost, at least the first part of it, where you're getting sort of the devil's viewpoint of the war in heaven, and it's sort of like, how dare you humanize this devilish figure, this evil thing that's just pure evil. And it's like, but yeah, it's the devil. I mean, we know it's the devil. He's going to be an unreliable narrator, but at the same time, um he's got his own side to tell. His followers have their own side to tell. Why did they choose to follow him into ultimately damnation? And one of my favorite scenes in that is how God is sort of like telling Jesus, because they're the Trinity, hey, couldn't we stop this from happening? And the answer is yes, we could stop all of this from happening. We can stop the fall of the angels, we can stop the fall of mankind, but that would be interference with free will, which is something else you talked about when you were talking about your work. And I guess I'd like you to say a little bit more about the nature of free will and faith and how that plays into divine revenge. Because if we do have free will, how is it fair that a god might want to take that free will out upon us for exercising it?
Yeah, so this is actually, the funny thing is, like, I don't remember either of those books really well. So I do have them on my list to read before I start book one of Series of Sacrilegious Events, for that reason, though, because I did remember that pretty clearly. Just the fact of how I felt about, like, having the devil as a narrator. Um, and I do think that was something that probably stuck in my subconscious, even, once I started writing the seven deadly sins as I write them. But for me, it it really does depend on, I mean, it is point of view for sure. But we have to also examine what free will means. That's true, because if you were, talking from, hey, I believe in, this certain thing happening, or, this coming to pass if I do X, Y, or Z. Okay, that's understandable. Like, that's, you know, I'll just actually just make it really specific to follow it easier. But like in Catholicism, being told like you're gonna go to hell if you do X, Y, or Z, and me thinking, oh, well, I've done X, Y, and Z, and not realizing, well, X is I'm queer. I can't change that. There's nothing I can do about that. And then, going from there and having to finally really look at what we're being asked to do and not do. um, and again, having these certain stipulations to who you can be. Now, where did my free will go? Where does that disappear to now that I'm on this pact of punishment with the deity that I've chosen to follow? Right, because now I'm looking at it in the same way as you just said. Like, I don't, where does the free will go? Where has it gone off to, and why would I be punished for utilizing it? So with, the series of sacrilegious events, what inevitably came for me was like the seven deadly sins. They're not actually demons. They're indigenous gods that were believed that they were going to be treated as friends by a new god that came into their lands, and that's not what happened. So now we're looking at, well, we're being trapped here and we're having stories told about us and we're being demonized. and treated like the villains when all we wanted was peace. We wanted to protect our people. And now we can't do that. And every time we try to do that, there's stories about us that say we're the bad guys. So how do you kind of take that and make it into uh, a critique, not just of the religion itself, because it's not just one religion, and it's definitely not, just the God you believe in, or et cetera, et cetera. For Catholicism, it wasn't the best day in my life was realizing that what man says to me about God is not what God is saying to me. We have a very big issue with kind of taking those two apart. Catholics are actually really good at it because my family never listened to the Pope. So I think that was probably a plus because I could then see the disconnect between what man says about God and what I believe about God, or what I want to say about God, or what the Bible is telling me about God. Like those are two separate things. They're constantly two different things, which was eventually why I broke up with Catholicism to begin with. But to take that, this disconnect between what we're telling each other and ourselves about, what God means, what God meant, what God wanted us to do, versus what we actually see, even just, in the Bible, or what we want to believe just based on the generic, most generalized statements about God. You really have to look about what it means to you, because there's still interpretation, right? And that's kicked us in the ass a lot, is the interpretation. Uh, and that changes from person to person, because a lot of people will use it to their own means. And the rest of us have to sit there and be gaslighted about what that means, like what these statements mean. What does this take away? What is the takeaway from this, or what is, the meaning of this X, Y, and Z? And we can argue about that for centuries. We have. So I think for me to kind of move away from that and decide what I wanted to do with my story, the free will became centralized. It became central because, like, even in sleep, in Sing Me to Sleep, I was really proud of the system that I built around that, because what I started with was consent, which in romance, it's a very big thing, obviously. I mean, it should be everywhere, but in romance, like, we really try to kind of make sure it's there, but also getting very creative. And for me, the sleep paralysis demon, he couldn't touch the mortal woman that he falls in love with until she literally, like, physically, emotionally, mentally allowed it. Even if she, said it out loud, if she didn't mean it, he couldn't touch her. So it was very important to me to start there in this smaller corner of consent and build out to what free will actually means, which is, if I actually want to do it, not somebody told me in a church that I should do it, not I read this and now I'm trying to convince myself I have to do it, or I've been threatened by a God I've never seen, so I have to do it. That's not going to work in this world. You have to want to do it. And obviously that's really, in the real world, unrealistic, because we're all influenced by, even if I don't want to do something, I'm probably still influenced by my religion. Me, my queer journey was influenced by my religion, whether I wanted it to be or not. Um, and that's true for a lot of people. So we have to really look at, the limitations of the real world, which is like we're influenced by it. It's already preset, whatever. A lot of us, have those presets because we were raised in a religion, and we were, raised with these different influences, et cetera, that we didn't have power over. And sometimes we get out of it. Sometimes we realize the issues and we get out. Sometimes we accept the issues and we stay in, or sometimes we never notice the issues and are continually brought deeper into those worlds. So I think that it's kind of important to look at what free will actually means, and that's something that's not really put under a magnifying glass for a lot of people, because there's a whole host of contradictions about free will in those stories. But yeah, again, I think it was really important to have the people that we've decided are the demons, or decided, the devil, et cetera, like, why are those things evil? Why are these certain things evil? Because somebody said they were, and we believed them. So where was the free will? Who made, who actually saw these beings doing whatever they were said to be doing and then decided like they're evil? Because we've, used religion to villainize or demonize a lot of things that shouldn't be, don't have to be, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really the concept that I wanted to take and kind of put on the table and be like, hey, let's look at this. Like, let's really look at it and ask ourselves, well, how did we end up here if we have free will? And if we do have free will, if we really had free will, would we still end up here? And that was like the most important question that I really wanted to ask myself when I started writing this series.
I think you give me two more questions if that's cool with you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
The first one is and I'm having a hard time framing the idea in my head into a formal question, but it's the notion of predestination via actions. In other words, like you're going to make a certain choice based on the information you have, but it's a choice versus what you said about your own nature as a queer person and mine as well, is that it's an inherent trait. It's how we're built as human formed people. And we're just this way because we're this way and we're made this way where it really is a true predestination. We are created in the image of whatever we're created in. And here we are. And then you've got this theological impression of a creator who dislikes, if not despises, what they've created. And I was wondering if you could just, I guess, interpret my brain salad and also give me your thoughts on my brain salad because I'm curious what you think about this.
I think, I mean, yeah, that is hard, especially because when you're in it, right, when you're living it, you're part of that, your own, like your own mythology obviously has to include you because you are the central person in that mythology. That's the way I've looked at it, just in trying to understand it myself. And I think the choice is really whether or not you decide to be yourself. Um, and it's a horrible choice because you shouldn't have to choose, but that's really the choice that we're being offered in the church. That's what it felt like to me. Um, in the church was because you're saying, well, if you want God to love you, you have to pretend to be somebody else. Because it was never, if you want God to love you, you have to choose not to be queer. Because I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't do that. I knew in kindergarten that I was trans, even though I didn't have a word for it. I had no idea what that meant, that I could medically transition, had no inkling whatsoever. That word did not exist in my vocabulary. It did not exist to other people in my circle. Even when they saw people, I remember, I was probably 11, 12 years old when there was a man on a trans man on one of those daytime shows, and he was pregnant. And my family talked a lot about it, but never listened to me when I would try to explain the like, yeah, this is how I feel, or this is, what I feel about myself. It was constantly fight back, or they would get really angry. Like it would be such a fight to have to talk about it. And then when I actually came out the first time, it's like when I thought, I was just gay, they were very violent reactions to that from my family. But when I came out as trans, it was everybody was like, well, yeah, we knew. And it was almost more it angered me more because it was like, well, if you knew, you could have listened to me at any point in the last 20 years, and that's not what happened. So I'm thinking now, like at that point, it was, it wasn't a choice of whether or not I wanted to be queer. That was never the question. I never was given a choice. And even if I had been, I don't think I would have chosen differently because even at 11 and 12, I was still already questioning the church and what it asks you, and the traditional gender roles, especially with Mexican Catholicism, because the point of Mexican Catholicism was to colonize. It was to create these gender roles and these white supremacist systems within our communities. But like my knowing now and having reconnected already, like my native elders, they knew stories about gods and mythology in our, past, that we had queer people. Queer people existed. They knew they existed. There were records of them existing. Like we have words for them, words that aren't really often used anymore, but they existed. And so, and other native tribes and cultures also have the same evidence that we always existed. So a lot of my reconnection journey was a lot of deconnection from the church. Like that was the first step in my reconnection journey, was disconnecting from the church and unlearning all the harmful things that they taught me, all the harmful things that they said to make me believe that I was going to hell, or that I was a lost cause, et cetera, et cetera. So after that, when you do start, because there are, of course, there's still queer Christians, Catholics, 100%. That, and there are some in my family who still talk about how, like, yeah, well, I was made in God's image, and that's who I am. So yeah, the people who, God didn't make a mistake. Okay, great, he didn't. So let us continue to do what we've been doing and be who we were. Obviously that translates very different, because then you hear that line used against trans people who are, medically transitioning, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that thing of like, you want to both, it's in those instances where it becomes okay to say, well, both God and science say you're wrong. And well, before that it was, oh well, science is wrong because God's right, or vice versa. And now we're seeing it used and weaponized both ways. And I don't, I don't know what the answer is exactly, obviously, because my beliefs don't follow that anymore. But what I do know is that people, humans, human beings, under those belief systems are always going to find a way to weaponize those belief systems if that is what is in their heart. Um, so we have to really consciously think about where the belief system starts and where the humanity ends. And we don't do that a lot, because obviously you're in a cyclical argument with somebody whose belief system includes that you are subhuman. You can argue with them 1,000 times, you can go over and over in circles with it, but the moment that you turn and look at a queer Christian or a queer Catholic, they're going to have a completely different answer to what that person had. They're in the same religion. They're going to have a completely different answer, because it does start and end there. Like again, it's up to interpretation. You're interpreting your beliefs, faith system, et cetera, in the way that suits you, because we are all human and none of us are, perfect or infallible. Like we all have shortcomings. And if you want your religion to say queer people are going to hell, then that's what your religion's going to say to you. That's what's going to happen. So it really is, I think, it has to become an individual understanding to believe like, hey, okay, he didn't make a mistake. This is what, my creator believes, et cetera, et cetera. And it comes down to that. And as far as writing goes, like when you're writing these religious, systems, and a lot of, whether it's a queer normative world or not, you really do have to consider how those beliefs in your belief system, whatever belief system you're building, how does that translate to somebody who doesn't know the scripture, or doesn't, practice the rituals, et cetera, who aren't, like, because if you're building a whole world and the whole world doesn't subscribe to the same language, religion, you have to see how that translates to other people, and you have to see how it's going to be used with or against other people as well. um and so, in doing so, it can be very difficult to kind of work out, well, what's the best way to go about this for my story. And for literature, the lucky thing is you know what the story is going in. So you can do what humans do and use your scripture to serve the story, the main character, et cetera, et cetera. And that's okay. It just doesn't, we obviously should not be doing that in the real world, but we do it anyway. So we learned from that. And now in literature, you can kind of do that. Um, but I hope I answered your question at least somewhat.
Oh, you definitely did. And I just want to say I'm sorry that you had such a difficult coming out experience. That can be really rough. I know.
Thank you.
Um, Shifting topics a little bit. I want to go back to something you said about gods moving in. A new god moves in, and I want to talk about, I guess, and this might have more of an eye towards like as my cat walks by, an eye towards like how you do your world building as a writer, how you create a divine order, whatever that might be, or implement one that already exists. And again, you're doing this respectfully. Local gods versus like an omnipresent god. You know, the idea of like the god of the seas versus the god of this particular river crossing or whatever it might be. I was wondering if you could give us some thoughts on that. And then I think we get back on script.
Um, I mean that is difficult. I mean, I really again, it just because for this story, obviously the gods are in charge of their own narrative, so they are telling their own story. Obviously, it's not all the gods. There are so many, even just in America, uh, of like the entire thing, the entire middle, south, north. There are so many indigenous and native gods that I wouldn't even write all of them anyway, because I would only write from my culture where I'm feel most comfortable in things that I know. um so there's going to be a lot of holes, or there'll be brief mentions, etc., etc., and that all becomes clear. It should. But in thinking about how those cultures kind of interacted, uh and even with black slaves coming in and bringing their spiritual beliefs from home and integrating that, and you've seen all those places in the United States and in the Caribbean and even in Mexico, where those have taken root and they've kind of mixed up into something new. um, those have to be taken into account as well. But I think in considering like what it looks like when like that the Mexican Catholic deity meets these indigenous smaller deities who have you know all these different tribes in mildly close proximity to each other. So there's a lot of spirituality, a lot of spirits, etc., etc. A lot of ours did look the same. Like there were cultures really close to each other that they had the same gods by different names, or they were related, or we came from the same ancient civilization and branched out, and then we had the similar gods with different names, etc., etc. To have them kind of meet this central deity, and again in being respectful to try to, because for me Mexican Catholicism and colonial Catholicism, that's different from, say, other parts of the world, or Christianity in other parts of the world. That's very different to me. So for me it did feel like a completely different deity, because that deity was used differently against the people they were trying to colonize. And keeping that in mind, this becomes like a rogue god or a new god that we don't know how to interact with, or we're trying to be friendly to, and it becomes an act of betrayal, etc., etc. And obviously a lot of that goes into a prequel that is may or may not be written, likely not, just because it's such a huge thing, but I would still have to build it in order to pull from it in the regular series. So it becomes this thing of like, how did how we became this one central deity, from believing in gods of the river, gods of this lake, or gods of the mountain, however that, especially because everybody's gods kind of work differently. They take different forms. Some of them were never most of the Nawa gods, that's my culture. They didn't have like human bodies. Like they weren't humanoid figures. There's a lot of them that were just there, like they were constantly there. The rivers, the lakes, the rain, etc., etc. So the earth especially is a big one. But in taking that into consideration and having another god come in and kind of like look down on what was going on, it really just mirrors colonizers coming in and looking down on the indigenous people. So it's still a very human experience. And I think that's probably the easiest way. Again, like I talked about it when trying to get people to relate. I think in the same way, a lot of well, at least what I'm going to write is going to it's going to mirror human experience because that's what I know, and that's what makes it more realistic to me. Um, so we have to kind of consider it in that way of just like, this one force or this one, you know, this entity that thinks it's above all else kind of just pushes aside what was already there and decides that it wasn't worthy or it was evil or it couldn't be, integrated, which a lot of it was integrated in Mexico. Like that's one of the main thing, the big things that we struggle with now. um it's because the integration went so well that it's hard to pinpoint, where the colonization ends and begins. And it didn't end, but people are still having that argument. So I had to also kind of go in and make sure it was as fluent as it sounds, which is that one, we had all of these, and then all of a sudden we had one, and everybody was okay with that, except they weren't. But everybody wanted us to believe that everybody was okay with that. And I think it's very hard coming from. I mean, I don't know if I would. I don't think I would be able to write this book if I hadn't broken away from my religion, right? I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have a reason to, because I wouldn't have seen all this. It wouldn't have made any sense to me. It would have been a much different project. I don't even know, if I'd be a writer right now if that wasn't the case. Um, but it does come into like to be respectful. I felt like I had to treat the Catholicism in my story as a singular entity. The Catholicism that I broke away from, that traumatized me, I treated it like a singular entity as opposed to the entire religion. And that's not to say that other Catholics or ex-Catholics wouldn't feel the same. I have a lot of ex-Catholic friends, and I've talked to them at length about this series. So we've had a lot of the same experiences, but it's still important to me to that people know like this was a singular entity and it treated us differently than it may have treated other people around the world, or it had a very different use or utilization when it came to Mexico uh, than it did in other places. So I think that that was really important to kind of isolate that, because what we're looking at is the colonial idea, the idea of colonialism, why it was used as a weapon of colonialism. That's what I'm looking at, not Catholicism as a whole. That's a whole different, thing. Obviously, I could talk about it as a whole, but I don't. That wasn't what I wanted to do with the story. So, and for other writers in going into that, I think it really is important to think about how, again, the setting plays, like how the setting plays into the story itself. So if you have like, and it's, I mean, it might be easier too if you have that upbringing. If you came from a culture with multiple gods, it's going to be easier to come up with a pantheon of multiple gods that serve smaller domains, et cetera, et cetera. And if you come from, a major monotheistic religion, it's going to be easier for you to create an omnipotent, all-seeing God. Um, but I think that does come down to like personal belief, personal preference, et cetera, and also what is being served by the story. Because I think like in most of my work, even separate from the Seven Deadly Sins, like the Gods of Hunger series, which is again the Greek myth series, all the gods are mortal, but they still believe in the fates. So the fates, like in Greek mythology, they're still the three, the only three goddesses in that world right now. Like that's what I've uh, established in the first four books, which is they exist and everybody believes in them. And it's not even really, they don't talk about it a lot in the way that we would talk about like God, of like, oh, well, they want us to do this, blah, blah, blah. It's mostly just like, thank the fates, or, the fates have this cut out for them or something. So it's a very loose faith or belief system in the gods of hunger. Uh, because without gods, like really all they have is this belief that like everything is fated, everything works out the way it needs to, et cetera, et cetera. So I've given him that. And that's just for me because yeah, as someone who is polytheistic and has a belief system, it's just easier for me to put it in there. Some people might like it without it altogether, and that's okay. Um, but even for, other works that I've done, I've gotten smaller pantheons. Some of them have four gods. Gods of Hunger has the Fates, just that, and they're kind of treated as one entity as opposed to three. Um, and then Sing Me to Sleep had the religion from series of sacrilegious events, which was there is a god. We don't know much about him yet. There's a lot of reveal that comes from the first book. Uh, and then it really just depends on what you need in your story, what you're trying to accomplish. If one god does it, great. If multiple gods do it, great. If you're just looking for your character to have something to believe in, you can absolutely do that with fate or uh the universe, destiny, etc. Like anything can be made into a god, and once they are a god, you can pretty much add whatever kind of all seeing, all knowing, etc., that you want to. So it becomes very easy to get lost in that, world building wise, but it's also a very open and interpretive kind of area for your story.
I definitely like the idea of interpreting the fates because they're always fun. They're like my favorite and least favorite part of all of the cosmos. Um, I'm thinking it's worth a side note, just if you haven't seen Overly Sarcastic Productions video about Aphrodite and how Aphrodite's faithful migrated from one area to the next, and Aphrodite changed and became Aphrodite and had previously been like Ishtar, and I can't remember previous stuff before that, but like that to me is like fascinating how like the world building is shaped by faith traveling with the people that believe them because you carry your faith with you.
Right, exactly.
Um,
And that happened with a lot of the Greek gods. It like a in one of my classes we talked about that a lot, about how even Zeus, his roots weren't entirely in Greece, like, or they, came from, Crete first and then kind of moved up, but there was another god before him that was similar to him, and they kind of just moved them out and put him in. And it is that thing of like religion can constantly grow and evolve depending on the human that is carrying it. So I think that's really important too.
Speaking about growing and evolving, and as we start to gear up and wrap up, more broadly speaking, is there anything about your experience that might help viewers, especially those who are interested in writing their own work, in growing their careers? Like, what are some things, maybe not necessarily on the theme of religious affiliations and divine revenge, but just things in general that, like, real quick key tips that someone can take, pick up, and run with, and be able to grow from?
It's a research, 100 times research, reading. Obviously, those are things that are going to be told to you a lot, but I really love to just say it because um, reading just in general, not just to become a better writer, but also a better researcher. I've been in school a long time, so that's kind of where that comes from. I read a lot of like scholarly articles, just like articles that come across my page, just things like that, because they're always going to enrich your writing, whether you think so or not. They're always going to enrich your writing. They're always going to give you a little more knowledge than you had, or a little more information about some niche aspect of your world that you might need later. Um, it's also important to kind of build your community and be in community with other writers and creators, just so that you can have a different worldview, from that, or whatever you're doing or wherever you're doing it at. You have somebody that can be like, hey, this thing that you've kind of created or written, etc., like, this is what it reminds me of, so they can give you more ideas, etc. Like, it's really helpful to have, not, I mean, obviously don't make friends for just to be sounding boards, but if you are in conversations with other creators, it's going to enrich you heavily. You're going to learn a lot, you're going to see new things, um you're going to have your ideas refreshed and rebuilt, and it's going to be great. Same, it's the same as with reading. It's just about opening yourself up to more experiences and getting more acquainted with the world that you are trying to write in. Um, Additionally, I would say just like I know obviously like the everybody's most loved and most hated writing advice is like write what you know. But you can know a lot if you read and talk to people and you're in community with people. And writing from communities that you are in, it's always going to be a plus. So I would say, and it's never a waste. I know somebody that I was on the panel with on Tuesday, which is the paranormal romance panel, did make a note to say that, which is it's never a waste, and that's absolutely true because you are going to have community regardless of what happens with your work. And it's also easier because look, publishing, whether you're self-published, indie published, trad pub, it's difficult. Having people that understand that, because I'm gonna tell you right now, most people outside of the writing community, they're not going to understand what we're talking about. I have tried to talk about, the publishing world with my family, and I always get just blank looks because nobody knows what's going on. They're always really surprised at how much goes on. So it's really easy to be able to have people that you can go to and be like, hey, this happened. And they can pretty much walk you through it. There's always going to be somebody who's had the experience before or at very least understands. So that's really important too. I think other than that, I mean, look, WriteHive is amazing. I think last year was my first year. I learned a lot. There's so many great speakers. If there are other conventions like this, great. I would go to them all or as many as you can. Like not all of them you have to pay $1,000 for to get a seat. So like, come here, listen to people, talk to people, interact. I'm the most introverted person in the world. I don't really talk to people offline. So this is a really good environment to kind of be able to open up and speak and talk to other people that kind of come from the same uh, places or have the same motivations. And that's we're all writing, we're all learning, we're all growing. So that's really important. And then, I mean, other than that, really just write what you love. I know we all live in a capitalistic society that is trying to suck us dry, but write what you love because I promise you, one, the readers are going to know if you wrote something just for because you're trying to get a book deal or you're trying to make money, and it usually doesn't work out any better than writing what you love. So write for yourself first, write what you love, have fun with it, and the rest of it does come. But if you burn yourself out hating what you're writing in your first year, it's not going to matter anyway. So definitely just make sure you're comfortable and let yourself create, let yourself have those times. Like I know people say write every day, blah blah blah. You don't have to. If you are reading, if you're watching a show or whatever and you're gaining inspiration, if you're playing a video game, I highly recommend RPG video games. I take a lot of inspiration from those in world building especially. So your hobbies are not, it's not wasted time. Don't think that you're wasting time by, watching something or doing your hobbies, et cetera, et cetera. You need something to ground you. You need something that's gonna take some of the pressure off, because it's a high pressure game. So I would say, yeah, enjoy it. Make sure that you're enjoying yourself. And if you ever find that you're not enjoying it, you're probably on the edge of burnout and should take a break. And that's it.
That's great advice. I think I want to take one thing you said earlier and resurrect it a little bit, which was sensitivity readers. Because if you are writing what you know, that's really important and that's great. But you're always going to have to write something you don't
Yeah,
necessarily know. And if you're going to do a lot of that, definitely get extra sets of eyes on it that do know what they're talking about. Because the last thing you want to do is make that kind of mistake that's easily
right.
preventable, and it's worth the effort to
And
make that
on
happen.
that note, and I did want to, because I said this in the panel on Tuesday too, because we talked about sensitivity readers. I'm a big fan of them, 100%. But I would caution, I like to caution younger authors that are coming in and using their sensitivity readers for the first time, etc. It's putting a lot of pressure on one person to speak for an entire community. So just be conscious of that. I personally have always said, like, when writers come to me and say, I'm getting a sensitivity reader. You don't have to say your sensitivity reader's name. If you had one, you had one. You don't have to, throw them under the bus if something bad happens, because they are only speaking from their experience. It's very good. Even if like you write in a community you're from, or in, from something that you do know, you could still need a sensitivity reader, because it is easier to have two people on it versus one. But sensitivity readers are not infallible. They might miss something, or their experience could be completely different from another person exactly like them down the street. So that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously, not saying don't, like, it's pointless. It absolutely isn't. Sensitivity readers are amazing. They do great work. It's just, for them, I'm speaking in defense of them. Like, don't put too much pressure to think like, oh, I got a sensitivity reader and somebody still called something out. And it's also possible too, is like there might be multiple reasons to need a sensitivity reader in your book. There might be, multiple aspects of your book that might benefit from a sensitivity reader. So you kind of expect one sensitivity reader to get it all. Um, so I think that is important, is just to think about the limitations of sensitivity reading. And that's why it's also good, again, like if you're in community with the people, or the groups, etc., that you're writing with, it's a lot easier to kind of incorporate them, because then it just mirrors your own world, like your own real community, your own real circle, etc., etc. Like if you have friends from other backgrounds as you, but they're your friends, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to write about them, because you know them, how their lives differ from yours, or how that experience differs from yours, and you discussed it. So it's a lot easier to, you know, do a good representation, or I don't like the word, but like a good picture of realistically give like the realistically representing them, because it's the best way I could say it. But it's just something to keep in mind, is like the limitations. Like, you're not always gonna write, but if you get something wrong and somebody says something, the best thing you can do is listen and own up to it, or whatever, as opposed to just like throwing your sensitivity reader under the bus, or saying, well, I did this and it didn't work out. It's not always them, and it's not always a failure. Okay, so don't beat yourself up too hard about it. You just have to, we're learning. All of us are learning. All of us are growing. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially for using sensitivity readers. Just because I know a lot of people put a lot of weight on that. Um, so I just want it to be realistic, the limitations of a sensitivity reader, but still 100% a great idea. Definitely, if you can get them, I 100% say that you should.
Awesome. All right. So that is my last question. One last time, where can people find you and your work? What other events are you doing? Website, anything like that?
So you can find me and most of my information at rmvirtues.com. I will also be on the paranormal romance masterclass panel, and then decolonizing your fiction panel as well. Um, Currently, like I said earlier, the standalone sequel to Sing Me to Sleep, which was my sleep paralysis demon story, it will be in a Kickstarter with Bonkers Romance, Katie Robert and Jenny Nordback. And that will be launching. It's a Kickstarter for the Black Rose auction, which is what it's called. Basically, it's 6 books that take place at this auction. So they're all related, but also standalone.
Hmm.
And it'll be in a book box. There's going to be a bunch of swag that's only available during the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter starts June 6th, and you can see the pre-launch page on the homepage of my website, which is again rmvirtues.com. You can also find me on patreon.com at rmvirtues, where I do a lot of bonus shorts, character art, things like that, short stories, like different short stories, sneak peeks, excerpts, etc., etc. Uh, and then I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at rmvirtues. Um, but yeah, I think that's it currently.
All right. Well, excuse my wife sneezing downstairs. Friends, that concludes our guest of honor interview with Arm Virtues. We here at WriteHive deeply appreciate you coming and checking this interview out. And we encourage you to check out all the other wonderful events we've got going on this weekend. We also have a year-round Discord that we have. We do things like I help moderate a weekend write-in that we do every other week. I'm the host, and then every other week someone else is the host, and sometimes it's guest host. It's a great time to come in, just chill out, write. We have all sorts of other events that we do, like the War Nerd Cafe. So there's a lot of different stuff available at the year-round Discord. We encourage you all to stop by, say hi, and have a good time, get some advice and or give some advice depending on where you are with what questions are asked. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you have a great experience at WriteHive. Have a great day and weekend and everything. Bye bye.